We are being joined by Mark Galeotti, honorary professor at University College London. Good afternoon, Mark.
Hello there.
Thank you for joining us. Nice to see you as always. And a special thank you to our translator as well. First of all, I wanted to ask you whether you agree with what is being written in American publications at the moment regarding the negotiations process, and whether China will be included. Do you think that after the end of counteroffensive, Beijing may prove to be the force to drive a dialogue between Kiev and Moscow?
I think there's an element of optimism at work here. I mean, look, in due course, eventually there will have to be some kind of peace talks. But the problem is at the moment that both President Putin and President Zelensky, in a way, think time is on their side. From the Russians' point of view, they hope that they can outlast the Ukrainians' will to fight and the West's will to continue supporting them. Whereas from Ukraine's point of view, there is always the hope that one more counteroffensive will make a decisive victory, which will force peace talks on their terms. So I think at the moment, there's very little prospect of that. However, if and when it does happen, then yes, I think the Chinese are waiting in the wings. They are waiting for the opportunity because they would like to be able to bring peace, not because they care about this war, but because they see this as an opportunity to assert their role, as they see it, to being a true global superpower. So I think from their point of view, they'll wait until they think it's highly likely that peace talks will succeed, and only then step in and offer themselves as mediators.
And if they do get involved, what conditions would the peace talks come down to? Speaking hypothetically, of course, as it is too early to really start realistically talking about this.
Well, look, let's presume that the Ukrainians managed to take back most of the occupied territories except for Crimea, which, let's be honest, would be a much, much tougher target and is a territory that, frankly, even many in Kyiv, off the record, will admit they don't necessarily want to get back or think it would be a wise move. So in that situation, it could well be that there could be some kind of a deal, which essentially says that the Ukrainians get back all their territory except for Crimea. Maybe there'll be some kind of new and internationally monitored vote on Crimea's future, in return for which essentially Russia accepts that Ukraine is indeed a truly sovereign nation. If it wants to join NATO, if it wants to join the European Union or whatever, that is its business. And the West provides various security guarantees. But this is very, very much an ideal case. At the moment, I'm unconvinced that Putin can or would offer these terms. And likewise, I'm not entirely convinced that President Zelensky could accept them either. Remember, he is a figure of astonishing political strength in the West, but he still has domestic opposition that he has to worry about. I mean, ironically, he is in some ways a little bit like Gorbachev, in that he's hailed as a near messiah in Europe and North America, but faces some severe challenges at home.
Right now, we don't hear a lot about opposition in Ukraine. There is a sense, although perhaps we might not see every nuance, that the nation has united around Zelensky as the leader of a country defending itself from an invasion.
Yes, that's perfectly true, but that's the whole point. At present, Zelensky is essentially untouchable precisely because he is the war leader who, with great bravery and tenacity, is indeed leading the fight back against invasion. However, the thing that really is going to be a problem for him is actually in the future. If there is room for some kind of a peace talks process in which concessions will have to be made, I think this is the hardest thing. At the moment, there is the mantra that every single square centimetre of occupied territory has to be returned to Kyiv's control. Already, some Western countries are suggesting behind the scenes that this is not a realistic goal, that there will have to be some kind of concessions made, however morally problematic that undoubtedly is. And that is the time when, in fact, the nationalists who never really forgiven Zelensky for not being one of them, that is, I think, the point when they will start to act. So I think, again, at the moment, Zelensky is untouchable. There's certainly no other figure who really sort of challenges him in terms of Ukrainian politics. But there is, particularly within the military and the security apparatus, a body of people who still have suspicions about him. And they're the ones who do actually impose some kind of constraints on Zelensky's future freedom of action.
You talk about concessions possibly being necessary and say that the Ukrainian armed forces may not be able to liberate all the occupied territories. What makes you think that? Why do you not believe in the upcoming counteroffensive being able to achieve absolute success?
I think because we have to realize that although the Ukrainians have frankly defied prediction in the past and carried off a series of really quite dramatic victories, we shouldn't forget the fact that even the Russian military can learn from its mistakes. It knows that there is a counteroffensive coming. Everyone does. It doesn't know exactly when, it doesn't know exactly where, but it knows it's coming. And it knows that a lot rests on this, that the West is looking for Ukraine to demonstrate that it actually can deliver a really dramatic blow. And the Russians have been digging in for a long time, not just physically in terms of building trenches and tank traps and other kinds of defenses, but also in moving to a more defensive mode of action. I mean, even the question of ammunition, which has been such a problem between the Ministry of Defense and Yevgeny Prigozhin, I mean, that is in part precisely because the military is beginning to stockpile, to ration its ammunition, to make sure that it has enough shells to try and fight off the counterattack. So I think the issue is this, that the Russians have demonstrated that they can be very tenacious in the defense, and they know the Ukrainians are coming. As I said, it's not to rule out the possibility of a Ukrainian victory on the battlefield, perhaps taking back something like maybe the city of Melitopol is one of the areas that people talk about. But I think that just as the Ukrainians themselves are trying to talk down expectations, we have to realize that the chances of there being a kind of a breakthrough victory of the sort that could bring an end to this war in this particular campaign season are sadly limited.
Your thoughts are almost exactly echoed by Ukrainian Minister of Defense Alexei Reznikov. I'm sure you saw his interview with the Washington Post, where he said that Kiev's allies had inflated expectations for the counteroffensive, and their hopes might lead to disappointment.
If
we switch the subject to Prigozhin, who you just mentioned, I know you've been closely following the bust-up between the leader of PMC Wagner and Sergei Shoigu, Russian Minister of Defense. First, he threatens to pull out of Bakhmut and harshly criticizes the Russian Ministry of Defense. Then he says he's staying and being given the ammunition he wanted. Then again today he posts a long video complaining about PMC Wagner's lack of ammunition supplies and accuses the Ministry of Defense of breaking their promises. At one point in this 27-minute long video, Prigozhin mentions a certain happy old man who thinks everything is fine for him. Despite the difficult situation on the front, the old man is happy. What conclusions can you draw from this? How can we interpret it?
I think it's very much the case that Prigozhin is caught in a trap of his own making. I mean, in some ways, this goes back to last year, which is a period in which the Russian military was desperately short of infantry on the ground, and Prigozhin had troops that he could provide. And therefore, the laws of supply and demand mean that actually his forces, Wagner Group, was very, very valuable. And Prigozhin, I think, mistakenly assumed that this meant that he was now one of the dominant figures in the war effort. This is the point when he started his campaign of challenging Sergei Shoigu and Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov. And this is the point generally when he was throwing his weight around also in domestic politics, attacking people like St. Petersburg Governor Byeglov. What's happened is that essentially Wagner is now no longer as important to the war effort. Shoigu, who is a ruthless but behind-the-scenes operator, is beginning to have his revenge, and other enemies of Prigozhin have also been gathering. And so Prigozhin finds himself in a position in which these rather bizarre videos are one of the few ways that he can try and reach out to Vladimir Putin, a man with whom he doesn't really have a strong personal relationship. So I think what's happening is that he more or less committed himself to taking Bakhmut, and decided that this was going to be the trophy he would give the president. That's not happening. He's looking for excuses. He's genuinely angry because he feels that the defense ministry is trying to sideline him. And, in a way, he's trying to see how much weight he has. I think what's happening is he's boxing himself into a corner. I mean, there will come a point where either he has to just accept his orders and carry on fighting, or he will try and pull out Wagner forces, which I think is going to be very difficult to do. And I think the Kremlin would regard that as betrayal. So really, there are no good options for Prigozhin, even though I can't find it in me to be that sorry for him.
Finally and quickly, there was a parade in Moscow today. Did you see it? How was the show?
Yes, and it was in many ways quite sort of sorry affair. It tried to follow the pattern, there were the bands and such like, but one couldn't help but notice only one tank, and that being a World War II version, a distinct lack of heavy weapons, and a distinct lack also of international figures at the podium. The only really noteworthy thing was Putin's short and rather sour speech. But to be honest, this definitely seemed like a day with much less victory than Putin was hoping for.
That's right. More on that on the show later. Thank you to Mark Galeotti, Honorary Professor at University College London, for joining us live. We discussed a whole range of topics, including the possible peace talks that have been talked about so much in Western media.
We operated in Russia for 12 years, and the government tried to get rid of us 3 times.
We had to leave, forced out of the country by new repressive laws after the first week of the war. Our freedom crushed by the authorities.
Мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We survived, started working from Europe, and now we are watched by millions of people every day.
There's no other independent news channel in Russian. We have now decided to tell the truth about Russia in English as well.
So that you could get news about Russia, the war in Ukraine, and Russian society directly from the source.
We want to tell you firsthand what is really happening in Russia. Subscribe to TV Rain Newsroom on YouTube, and let's take a look at our future together.